Let's take a second to talk about Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes' press conferences this morning. Let's talk Lions. Thank you for liking, for commenting, and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for also sharing this channel with your friends that are also Lions fans, because sharing is just the right thing to do. So both Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes had pressers earlier today, and in those pressers they talked about a lot of different things. I always love when the people asking questions think that they I don't know, do you think that you're going to trick them into answering your question? Do you hope that Brad just screws up or Dan Campbell accidentally says too much? I mean, that's gotta be what's going on, because some of the questions, I'm like, do you think that they're just drunk right now and they're gonna answer your question specifically about Kenny Golladay? I know you gotta ask. I know that you should ask because, hey, maybe they will tell us, but chances are, if it hasn't even been announced to the world yet, they're not going to just tell you or me that answer at a presser at 10 a.m. So real quick, I'm not going to go over everything because at that rate, you might as well just go watch the presser yourself. So I just want to key in on a few specific things, from free agency to the draft to Kenny Golladay. Looking first and foremost at Dan Campbell, he was asked about free agency, and really right off the bat, Dan Campbell was like, look, I don't want Brad Holmes having to chase positions when it comes to the draft. And so in free agency, yeah, we have to look for a wide receiver. He made it pretty clear that's somebody that we're going to be looking for. He said it's no secret that our wide receiver core is limited. It's no secret that our cornerback depth is limited. So those are positions that it sounds like the Lions, that Holmes, Campbell will be looking at when it comes to free agency opening up here in mid-March. Something else that was very intriguing to me, both Holmes and Campbell talked about it. Both guys pretty much came right out and said, get ready, there's going to be some news dropping most likely this week. I don't know, I think that's going to be, it sounded like that had to do with Desmond Trufant, Justin Coleman, some of these guys that we're going to be cutting in order to conserve some cap space. Very interesting. But really, he just came flat out. Dan Campbell was like, hey, there's going to be some news probably coming your way this week. And it sounds to me that we're going to start seeing the beginnings of the cuttings. One big thing that Campbell talked about was the idea of bringing in multiple players in these positions that are going to really complement but also push the other players gunning for that starting spot in that position. That's really something that Campbell talked about. Campbell pretty much brought up, he said, I want to bring in guys that are going to both complement but push the other players at that position. He brought up Swift. I want a guy to complement Swift, but also to push Swift to be more. And it sounds like that's going to be a lot of the philosophy coming in to this team. Complementing, but pushing. The one very intriguing thing that Dan Campbell said that kind of I'm reading between the lines. This is not what he said, but this is me reading between the lines of the words that he spoke. He was asked about Kenny Golladay, and he was really asked about the franchise tag. Dan Campbell's response was, well, I'd like to be franchise tagged right now. It's a pretty good chunk. To me, what I'm reading between those lines, again, this is not the news, this is not what came out, but to me, hearing that with the intuition that the good Lord gave me, it kind of sounds like the Lions are discussing the franchise tag with Kenny Golladay, and that's really what they would like to do. They would like to tag him, but it sounds to me like Kenny Golladay wants the extension. He wants to be signed for the larger chunk, obviously, because who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want the dollars? However, it sounds to me, from the way Dan Campbell worded it, like they are going to tag him, most likely trade him after. Really talking about free agency, Dan Campbell made it pretty clear. Look, we're just like any other team. We have our issues, we have the things that we struggle with, and he brought up the fact that people are like, oh, are you just going to be bringing guys from New Orleans in here into Detroit? Kind of that shell shock of what Matty P did to us with the Patriots, 16X Pats making their way here. And Campbell made it pretty clear. He said you might see a guy or two that comes from LA, Philly, Chicago, New Orleans, teams where some of these coaches on the new staff have been. And he said, why is that? Because we know their downfalls. He said, so much of what I am bringing in players and the problem with free agency is free agency and not knowing a guy and you bring him into your team, you don't really know the pitfalls until you watch them play, until they're in the locker room, until you get to see them on repetition, right? And so for him, he's like, yeah, you might bring in, you'll probably see a guy or two come from New Orleans. He said, it's because I know them. I know them. I know how to work with them. I know their downfalls. And it's not going to be like Matt Patricia. However, it does sound like we're going to see a few fellas from the teams that we now have coordinators and coaches from. Now, let's move on to Brad Holmes and some of the key things that I heard him say that stuck out to me. Right off the bat, Brad Holmes got into the franchise tag. That was the first question. It was like, oh, what are you going to do with the franchise tag? Romeo or Golladay? What's the deal? And he pretty much just said, hey, listen, there's a reason, there's a rhyme, there's a reason to why we haven't done it yet, why we haven't made the move yet. He said, we're trying to do everything properly. We're trying to do it best for the Detroit Lions and then also for the players. I think one of the most intriguing things that Brad Holmes was asked about, what he really ended up talking about, was this new draft class. Specifically, he brought up a few different positions. First and foremost, he was like, look, we got a top 10 pick. We have a top 10 pick, and we have to do our due diligence, really understand the players that are going to be in that top 10, understand them, and not just pick for position's sake, but rather doing the due diligence, doing the homework, and picking properly for the future of the franchise. He made it very clear. He said the safety class is deep. He said it's highly valuable and it's deep. He then got into the quarterback class, which I found very interesting because later in the presser, he was also asked another question about the QBs. And so he started to get into that. And so basically mashing those two questions and answers together, he pretty much gushed over the quarterback class. Holmes seemed very interested, very intrigued in the quarterback class. Very interested in the fact that every quarterback brings a different style of gameplay, whether it's a pocket passer, somebody with mobility. He just brought up the fact that they're all different and they all offer something really, really outstanding. I did not expect at this point for the Detroit Lions to be in the QB race, but after listening to him, I am going back to the draft board and erasing things and thoughts and ideas and starting to scratch the old head once again because Brad Holmes is making me think twice. And lastly, Holmes talked about the current roster. Very specifically, he was like, hey, listen, defensively, we got a lot of holes to fill. There's a ton of gappage that we have to handle. He said it's no secret. The cornerback situation, he's like, we got Desmond Trufant and Coleman, which you're going to hear news about later this week. He said we got a couple of young guys there as well, Kuda. And so really listening to him talk about the defensive side of the ball, he talked about the lack of depth. But even more so, he talked about needing to add starters. And that's not what you ever really want to hear, but something that I do like, something that I really liked that Holmes said was he brought up the fact that he said there's a lot of young talent on the team that you and I as fans and that a lot of people didn't really get to see play, didn't get a lot of playing time last year in the 2020 season, and that he, the coordinators, the coaching staff, they are excited to see some of that youthfulness, the young players come forth and make an impact this season. All in all, what I can tell is that A, when it comes to Kenny Golladay, they're not giving out any info. Number two, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are on the same page. Like these two guys, they're swimming in sync, baby. Like I'm like, is this synchronized swimming in the 50s? Because I'm down. And really, lastly, when it comes to the draft, they're not just looking to fill a position. They're not just like, well, we need a wide receiver. Bing. Or, well, we need a D lineman. Bing. Like, they're actually going to take the right approach and look at the draft, look at the players that are available if we stay at 7 and choose wisely. That's something that I love. I got faith in these two guys that they are going to make a wise decision in this draft, even if it does end up shocking me. Which I'm at this point now, listening to him talk about QBs, I'm like, who knows, man? Draft night is going to be a fun night. But you tell me, if you watched the presser, how do you feel? What'd you think about listening to the two of them talk? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And as always, I'll catch you next time on Let's Talk Lions.